the forestry sector, which is providing a lot of this new biomass, would stand to benefit quite substantially from a renewable electricity standard. At the 40 million ton level, which would be roughly doubling their current output of woody biomass, we would see about a 69% increase in their output. And we think that's probably reasonable to expect that they could achieve a doubling or tripling of output with the right incentives and probably with some diversion of land use from other current uses and a increase in the development of bioenergy crops that are dedicated to biomass production that could have yields 2 or 3 times as high as what we have currently. One of the things people are really interested in is how it affects prices for biomass. And this is the change in the composite price for forestry commodities. It basically represents woody biomass. Again, at this mid-range value, we would see an increase of up to about 18% in the price of woody biomass. So that could potentially have some adverse effect on the forest products manufacturing sector that is competing for this resource. And there may have to be some special policies and offsetting payments made to minimize some of these adverse impacts. If you look at a picture of the economy across all these different sectors, you see the biggest effect in the forestry sector, which is producing the biomass. An increase, this is at the mid-range scenario, an increase of 69% in output, an increase in income or employment of about 50%, and then also an increase in imports. Not all of this resource would be available in the state. We would have to probably import some of it from neighboring states and other countries in Central America and the Caribbean. Big impacts on state government revenues because the total economic activity is increased. That means more sales taxes, more property taxes, more fuel taxes that are all going to be collected by the state of Florida. At the mid-range mobile capital with no subsidy, we're looking at an increase of about 1/2 of 1% in total state government revenues, or something like $80 million annually. Okay, so then in conclusion, we think that this is a good policy for Florida and most any other state that has a modest endowment of biomass resources. It has the potential to increase the GDP, income, and employment and tax revenues. It will decrease the imports of fossil fuels because we're substituting local, indigenous bioresources for these imported fuels. The forestry sector would benefit dramatically. The forest products manufacturing sector, on the other hand, would probably suffer a little bit, but those adverse impacts could be mitigated with some smart policies. And then all of these various incentives like tax credits and biomass feedstock subsidies only serve to increase the benefits of the development of bioenergy. And we think those are probably good policies and should be continued. So I'm going to skip over that, but I'll just point out here we have some resources available. A lot of these technical reports are available on the website. And then some previous work we've done on developing community profiles and case studies, fact sheets and presentations on wood to energy are available at another website. So that's that's it. Are there any questions about the economic part of this?
Maybe one question about the price of electricity sold to the grid. What do you think it's, let's say, current situation and what do you expect?
The current retail price for electric power in Florida is around 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour. I don't know how that compares to your country. Probably pretty low. Under the most ambitious of these bioenergy scenarios, the price of electricity would be increased by about 0.5%, so a marginal increase. The price is increased because biomass is a more expensive fuel. I mean, there's no question about it. I don't want to mislead you. Bioenergy is not necessarily the cheapest form of energy, so it would lead to somewhat higher prices for end users, but it does have these other very positive economic impacts as well.
Do you can say how share of nuclear electricity you use in your Florida?
Yeah, that's a great question. We use a lot. We have a lot of nuclear power plants in Florida, more than any other state, I believe. There's at least 6 of them operating currently, and there's proposals for 2 new ones. These are would be the first new nuclear power plants built in the U.S. in about 30 years. So I think, the utility executives think that there is a place for nuclear power in this mix as well, because it's likely that they would be exempted from the new nuclear capacity would be qualified for part of this renewable standard. Now, I don't really believe nuclear is a renewable energy source, but it is a low carbon source and would contribute towards the goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So nuclear is a big, is a really big issue that's still on the table, and we have not come to any consensus yet about how it's going to be treated in the new legislation. But currently it represents about 20% of capacity in Florida.
And then the electricity generated from the nuclear, what would be the cost for this electricity from these new plants?
It's definitely much higher. I showed you the chart of relative cost. Nuclear here is kind of toward the upper end of it. It's definitely higher than natural gas and coal, and the low end of nuclear is about the same as the upper end of biomass. Nuclear is just so capital intensive, and that's the thing that's really limited it for 3 decades now. It requires an upfront investment of $10 to $20 billion to build one of these new plants.
Can we have this presentation?
Absolutely. I'll
just
provide it to Guntar's. Yes, sir.
What is the share of renewables in power production?
Currently, renewables, including solar, wind, and biomass, represents about 5% in Florida, so quite small. But the upside potential is pretty large. We think we could get to 20% pretty easily.
For electricity production from biomass, are you calculating as condensation process just produce electricity, or also cogeneration using heat?
Oh no, cogeneration is a big part of it. At least half of that current capacity is in cogeneration units installed in industrial plants. Many of the big forest product manufacturers have their own cogeneration units to provide their own process heat for their industrial process, and then their own electric power and then sell the surplus generation to the grid. And the beauty of the cogeneration is that it gives you, perhaps 40% total efficiency as compared to 25 or 30% efficiency with conventional combustion.
What kind of technologies you are calculating? Mainly steam turbine processor?
Well, the economic analysis really didn't consider the particular technology. We rely on the technology forecast by the U.S. Department of Energy, their National Energy Modeling System, which projects total demand, takes into account demands, population growth, and then they assume, build into that forecast, I think about a 1% per year increase in efficiency. We do think that there will be improvements in efficiency, but the particular mix of technologies was really not part of our research. We assumed the U.S. Department of Energy technology forecast.